But first, our big focus today, the race for America. And that really is a race that has gone down to the wire. Let's tell you what are the latest numbers that are playing out in America. Joe Biden, the challenger, is now just 6 seats away from that magical 270 mark. 6 electoral college seats away. Donald Trump is at 214, Biden at 264, which means Joe Biden just needs one more state and he could be the president. Let's look at those states where the counting is still on. Nevada with 6 electoral votes. That could be enough because Biden is leading there, but albeit narrow margin of just about 7,000 votes. The next state where counting is on is Georgia. And here 16 electoral votes. Biden has made a strong comeback and is just a few thousand votes now behind Trump. Counted votes is 96%. Then we turn to North Carolina, 15 electoral votes. Trump is at 50.1%, Biden at 48.7%, and 95% of the votes have been counted. Then we have Pennsylvania with 20 electoral votes. Trump has 50.7% here, Biden has 48.1%, counted votes 89% at the moment. So in all the states, Biden is in play. And let's look at the routes to power for him. At the moment, he could take Georgia with 16 votes and get to 280 from 264. Alternatively, he could probably pick up Nevada with 6, where he's leading by a small margin and reach exactly 270. A third route of power for Joe Biden is that he triumphs in North Carolina, where he's trailing, and goes to 279. The other scenario is he picks up the big one of Pennsylvania and goes up as high as 284. Plus, of course, as of now, he could cross 300 if he adds all the other states. Trump's routes to power are limited. He is, remember, at 214. He could then need Nevada, he would need Georgia, he would need North Carolina, the one state where he's leading, Pennsylvania, where his lead is being whittled down, Alaska, which is still to give a final count, but he's expected to win. That would take him to 274. So he's got a tougher route at the moment than has got Joe Biden. Okay, let's go straight across first to Cindy Sain, the Voice of America correspondent to Washington, D.C., to get the latest on the Biden and Trump camps' mood at the moment. Cindy, what's the sense you're getting as we come down to the wire? Does it appear that Joe Biden is increasingly in pole position to win the U.S. elections?
Yes, I agree with your assessment, everything that you've said so far. It looks like, nothing is decided yet, could still go either way, but it looks increasingly like former Vice President Biden is on the brink of winning. And we just don't know. I know people, your viewers and people all over the world are like, when is this thing finally going to be decided? But I just heard that in Arizona, where the count is still going on, and there's been people gathering outside offices where the count and some tensions there. That they're now saying they may not have their results until Friday. But we're expecting perhaps within the hour from the southern state of Georgia, maybe not final results, but at least an update on some of the heavily Democratic areas, Metro Atlanta, where there are a lot of African Americans still being counted out there. So we're all waiting and watching and just trying to be patient to let all these votes be counted. But I would agree with your assessment that at the moment, Vice President Biden has more different pathways to reach that magical 270 number, whereas President Trump basically kind of has to run the gamut and win several of those states. And Vice President Biden has said he is going to come out and speak on camera to the country again at some point today. So far, and this is also subject to change, but President Trump has no public events on his schedule.
Why is it taking so long? We know that Pennsylvania, millions of votes were cast mail-in, so that was always going to go on till Friday. Nevada had said yesterday itself that they would give final results on Friday. You're now saying Arizona also goes to Friday, and Georgia may not give a full count tonight. Why is it taking so long in some of these states where you've counted about 95% of the vote, like in Georgia?
Right. Well, I understand the frustration, and it's a combination of factors, mainly being COVID-19 and the pandemic, and that we have so many, just a flood of mail in ballots that a lot of states weren't used to having. People didn't feel comfortable going to the polls, millions of them, some, of course, did. But so there's just the sheer number and volume of mail-in ballots, and then also different states. As you know, we basically have 50 different individual elections in this country. So different states have different regulations about when states can start counting these mail-in ballots and the early vote. And in several of these states, such as Pennsylvania, they do have Republican legislatures, and in some of them states they wouldn't allow counting to start until after Election Day. So some of this is not the fault of the states or the public servants who are, some of them are staying all night to count ballots. Some of it was sort of built into the system.
You know, one final point, there have been fears expressed in some parts of the United States of some possible violence that could take place the longer this drags on. Trump is already threatening to challenge a count in 3 states. That could increase if the margins continue to narrow. Is there that sense of prolonged uncertainty and, dare I say, the possibility, the specter of even violence in a few parts of America? Is that a real danger?
Well, I think it is. I think it can not be dismissed out of hand. Of course, certainly hoping that will not happen. But I also, here on the East Coast myself, but seeing video of what's going on in Maricopa County in Arizona, with a few people showing up with weapons. Outside, Trump supporters and protesters, and they're even angry now at Fox News, which had early on called Arizona for Joe Biden. So tensions are running high, and one can only hope, as you say, that the votes are counted, that that's a sacred vote, that's a sacred right to vote, that every last vote is counted, and then that one candidate is able to declare victory by hitting that 270 number. That's the way it works.
The magical number of 270. Cindy, thanks very much for joining me there from Washington, D.C. I know you've had a long few days, and you're probably going to have many more such days up ahead. But thank you so much for joining me here on the news today. Okay, remember, it's day 3 of the counting process. This is America's longest election day in a long while. And it's still unclear who will become the U.S. president. While Joe Biden is in pole position, the fact is that there are razor-sharp margins that he leads in Arizona and in Nevada, while the margins are narrowing for President Trump in Georgia and Pennsylvania. It's all to play for as we look at the battle for the White House.
He has no clue about what makes America great.
The Super Over in the United States has turned out to be a grueling test match. The heavy hitting is over. Donald Trump and his challenger Joe Biden are now dealing in single and doubles. Of the 8 decisive states, Biden has won 2, Michigan and Wisconsin. Many channels have called Arizona for Biden, and if numbers hold, he is just 6 electoral votes short of the magic mark. Inches short of the batting crease, Biden is in no hurry.
After a long night of counting, it's clear that we're winning enough states to reach 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. I'm not here to declare that we've won, but I am here to report that when the count is finished, we believe we will be the winners.
6 states up for grabs. Mathematically, the results could go 49 different ways. Most favor Biden. One reason why Trump is fuming, the road to get back to White House is getting narrower and narrower for him. He has questioned the counting process without any evidence, prompting social media sites to hide them.
This is an embarrassment to our country.
Trump has sought a recount on Wisconsin. He's filing suits in Michigan and Pennsylvania to halt counting, and in Georgia to separate lead ballots.
The Democrats know that the only way that they can win this election is to cheat in Pennsylvania. So we came here today, we met with all our lawyers. We are going to file suit.
So we are going to continue the lawsuit here. We're going to bring a second one, and then we're going to bring a federal lawsuit. And we're going to take a very good look at whether we bring this nationally. We certainly are going to bring it here and in Wisconsin. Quite possibly, we'll do a national lawsuit and really expose the corruption of the Democrat Party.
The worry now is that even if a super over ends, the United States might still have to wait for a decisive victor. The country could be looking at a long-drawn court battle before it gets its next president. Bureau Report, India Today.
Let me go now straight to Alisar Awad. She joins me from New York. And Alisar, you can give us an update of how you're seeing things panning out. Is there a sense of impatience as this is dragging on? Or are more and more Americans saying, look, Donald Trump can say what he wants. We want the last vote counted. What's the sense you're getting from the mood on the ground?
It's definitely, there's frustration, as mentioned yesterday. In fact, I feel like it's getting even more. You see across the nation there are protests happening where people are going against Fox News, where people are telling that we need to stop the vote. There seems to be frustration, but the senators from across the counties that we're waiting for, the states that we're waiting for, are saying that this is a democracy, therefore we are going to count every single vote, and really just hoping that everyone can continue to stay patient. But there is a growing sense of discomfort and anger, frankly.
New York seems to be, is that confined to certain pockets of America which are seen as Republican strongholds? Is that where you're seeing a stronger reaction? Or is there, this seems to be, at least from a distance, a very divided America at the moment, that Republican strongholds are where you're seeing the impatience, not necessarily across America.
No, I definitely think it is across America. It's really to do with people's mental health, being stuck in a pandemic, being stuck at home, and having nothing to do but go on social media. So I think beyond, of course, the Republicans seems to be taking it to the streets with their own weaponry, but across, whether you want to evaluate and analyze social media, or if you want to go into the different towns where you see people are branding exactly who they are voting for, there is a growing sense of frustration across, because this is the longest it's ever taken to get results. And in a country where time is money, people don't want to be waiting anymore.
People don't want to be waiting anymore, but as is being said again, every vote counts in America. Every citizen has his or her right to vote, and they're counting it, and they're counting it in a rigorous and disciplined manner. Thanks very much, Ms. Awad, for joining me there from New York at this moment. Let's take that question further. What does a divided America, which is battling for who should go to the White House, really mean for the world? Will Donald Trump honor the verdict? If it's against him, there's still no clarity on that. The race for America, is it now going to be mired in court cases? Is there a risk of widespread protests across the United States? These are just some of the questions I'm going to raise. I'm joined by Kishore Mehbubani from Singapore. I'm going to get voices from across the world. Distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute, and also someone who's been a president of the UN Security Council as a representative of Singapore. Kawal Sibal, former foreign secretary, is with us. Professor Amitabh Mattu, University of Melbourne and JNU, is with us. And Caroline Baumann, senior fellow, American Enterprise Institute, joining me. Also joining me, Sanathan Dhume, fellow American Enterprise Institute, joins me from Washington. And Raj Chengappa, group editorial director who's at India Today, who's been tracking this for us, is also with us. Let's take that to all of you. Whether the threat of a divided, what is the threat of a divided America mean for the rest of the world? Sadhanand, to you there in Washington, are you fearing now a prolonged period of uncertainty where Donald Trump may even challenge this election in court as he's threatening to do?
I'm actually somewhat more sanguine than your previous guest. I think for a country this size and for such an unusual election, it's in fact been remarkably calm and orderly. And I'd just like to remind your viewers that Twitter is not America. And obviously, you may have a few people here and there protesting, but in fact, I think people have treated this with great patience. And I'm quite optimistic that we're going to see a result fairly soon, perhaps in the matter in the sometime later today, though my colleague Carlin would have a better sense of that. My main takeaway from this is that even it looks like Biden will win, but it does look that like Trumpism as a force in American politics and therefore having some significance in the larger world is not going away. So those people who thought that you could simply rewind to 2016 and globalization as usual with the old kind of consensus on immigration and trade and so on, I think they will have to rethink. There has been a change in how a large section of American voters think about these things, and that will be true even though Trump loses, because he is not losing in a landslide. He is losing after generating a very large number of votes for himself.
Caroline Bauman, you agree with that? That in a way, Trumpism is going to outlive whatever happens, whether Donald Trump lives in the White House, goes back to the White House or not. And to that extent, America will remain in the foreseeable future a deeply splintered society.
I think we are deeply divided nationally about our politics. I don't think we're divided in our neighborhoods and in our communities. I'd like to point out that in 2000, we waited 34 days to have an election result. And at that time, the country was less divided, but still a fatigue factor set in. But at no time did Americans see the 2000 election, those 34 days, as a crisis. They thought it was a problem. They did not see it as a crisis. And so I think this has been a remarkably calm electorate thus far. Sure, we've seen a few pockets of protests, but no, Trumpism is not going to go away. And I think we've seen this around the globe where populist parties remain very strong.
Sadanan, just to push that point, because I'm trying to get your perspectives from the ground first. I mean, do you see, therefore, Donald Trump going away into the sunset calmly and quietly?
Have we ever seen Trump anything quietly and calmly in the last 4 years, Rajdeep? I think that should answer your question. He will not be quiet. He will not be calm. But the institutions are strong, and the institutions are strong enough to contain the eruptions of this very unusual character as he exits the main stage.
I think unusual is, of course, an understated word for what Donald Trump has come to represent. Caroline, you wanted to say something, Caroline.
Well, I agree that there are checks and balances in our system that will keep it running fairly smoothly going forward, and we'll get through this somehow. And I agree with my colleague Saad that it's very hard to predict Donald Trump's actions.
Very hard to predict what happens next. Unpredictable. Is that the reason why, Professor Amitabh Mattu, last night when we had you on the show, you seemed to suggest that the world would be a calmer, better place if Donald Trump is not in the White House? We still don't know. He could still pull off a last-minute surprise by winning all the remaining states. Seems unlikely at the moment. But is that one of the reasons why you feel the world will be in a better place without Trump? Because he is just too unpredictable at a time when the world needs stability and predictability.
Exactly right. And I wish I could be as sanguine as my friend Sadanand Dhume is about American politics and about the checks and balances. I wish that Donald Trump would not follow the advice. If you remember, Rajdeep, we used to learn a poem by a Welsh author called Dylan Thomas. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Do not go gently into that night. Trump is not going to go gently into that good night. He's going to rage, and
what can he do?
Rage on the streets of the United States.
No, but what can he do? If he's not president, he can rage for all he wants. What can he do beyond the point, Amitabh?
I mean, the fact of the matter remains, and that I agree, Trumpism as a phenomena, as a way of building a coalition with disempowered white working class and the rich oligarchs is going to continue trying to disrupt all democratic institutions and often taking the law in their own hands. We saw that civil unrest already unleash itself during the campaign. I think what you're going to see is violent protests. I'm not trying to be a contrarian here, but look at the way, where are the checks and balances when the Senate is still going to be controlled by Mitch McConnell, who, when Obama was elected, said, I'm going to frustrate every legislative action that the president takes. Where is the check and balances when the Supreme Court has been stuffed with, and Sadanand, I know, will not agree with this, has been stuffed with conservative judges? all well qualified, but all owing a debt of gratitude. And if you were to study judgments, conservative judges appointed by conservative leaders often act conservatively. Not that they would necessarily favor Trump, but I think the American system is diminished after this election. It's diminished in its own eyes. It's diminished in the eyes of the rest of the world.
You want to respond quickly to that, Sadanand? You want to, because you have a very different viewpoint.
I mean, I think these are precisely what checks and balances are supposed to be. The U.S. has divided government by design. The U.S. has a judiciary that is independent by design. And the fact that we have a Republican Senate is a check. It's going to be a check on the president. Of course, you could argue that it'll be harder for him to get stuff done, but it is designed as a check on excesses. That is the system that has worked for centuries, and that's what it is. So you can say you don't agree with that system, but you cannot characterize that as a case of checks and balances not being there, because those are precisely the checks and balances that have been put in place.
What you're saying is that this administration, if there's a Biden administration, is going to be paralyzed by a conservative Senate and a conservative judiciary, while you will have extra legislative protests in the streets of America, taking the law in their own hands and depriving millions of workers of their rights in many other ways. Is that the way the American system was supposed to run? Then I need a new lesson in American politics. Sadanand, you have lived there, you know America much more, but this is not the America that I have known or I have studied or I have worked in.
Khalid, Sadanand, do any of you want to quickly respond before I turn to what impact this will have on India and the region? Khalid, do you want to respond? Is that threat of violent protests exaggerated or real?
Yes, I believe they're exaggerated. And this is a very big country. Yes, there are going to be some protests, and yes, they will probably get out of hand. But this is a very big country that is voted for the 59th time in our history peacefully. And so I think we have reasons to be very optimistic about that. And as for a conservative Supreme Court, conservative justices on the Supreme Court, those justices have surprised us over and over again. Yes, their leanings may be that way, but they are all extraordinarily well-qualified individuals. They have different views on the Constitution and its interpretation, but I think we'll be just fine.
Okay, you'll be just fine. Okay, two views on that. Let's turn to then the other critical issue. How is all this going to play out? A divided states of America playing out for the region in particular. I want to go first to Professor Kishore Mehbubani. He's joining us from Singapore, where it is late night. How do you see the neck-and-neck U.S. elections playing out in the region for Asia, for India and China in particular, this kind of turbulence that we are seeing in American politics?
Well, I think this is clearly a very significant election in American history. And the likelihood, as we know, we cannot be sure, is that Biden is going to win. But if Biden wins, it's very clear that his priority has to be and will be domestic. You know, Joe Biden knows very well that he's inheriting a deeply divided, polarized society in the United States. He sees that as his primary challenge to bring together society, to generate economic growth, to deal with COVID-19, to go back to the climate change. So all his priorities will be domestic. So in terms of the geopolitical impact, in terms of the rest of the world, I think we should be psychologically ready for a less interventionist United States in the world, and certainly a less generous United States for the rest of the world. And as you know, even under President Trump, who's been a very good friend of India, he removed your generalized scheme of preferences. He cut down H-1B visas, which hurt Indians. So that's the sort of United States that we have to get used to in the coming years.
More specifically, I wanted to know, Professor Mehbubani, how you saw it playing out in the India-China dynamics. Assume, as you're saying, there's a Biden presidency. Does it become dramatically different to the way Trump viewed China, for example?
Well, actually, the paradox about Biden winning is that, if Trump had won, he would have given short-term pain to China, but long-term gain to China, because as a good friend of mine in Europe said, Trump's re-election means the death of the West. But in the case of Joe Biden, he'll give short-term gain to China because he'll be much more civil and much nicer and less insulting to China. But at the same time, he'll bring back the allies of United States closer back. Europe will come back to the United States. Japan and South Korea, which were drifting away, will come back to the United States. And so in that sense, China will have to deal with a more formidable alliance with Biden in charge.
Yeah, let me take that to Kawal Sibal. Kawal Sibal, how do you see this play out from an Indian perspective at the moment? What should we be looking for? A divided states of America, an America which, as Kishore Mehbubani is saying, becomes more insular, looks inward. Is that good for India or not good for India?
I think Biden will be less insular than Trump. Biden is going to be much more engaged with the rest of the world. Look at, for example, climate change. Mm-hmm. He will come back into the Paris Agreement, certainly. He will try and save the WTO, certainly. And he will join the World Health Organization. Probably he'll rejoin UNESCO also. Because the international strength of the United States depends on how much it participates in international governance. Mm-hmm. If they walk out of it, then they will lose not only their prestige, but their power, because other countries will then begin to fill up that space. Mm-hmm. And the decline of the United States that people talk about will actually be hastened. So I don't think Biden will go down that road at all. Mm-hmm. I don't think there'll be any substantial change apart from what was said, that he will be a little more civil perhaps with China. But China's challenge to the United States will remain. Xi Jinping is not going to change his thinking and policies and ambitions and Belt and Road Initiative and what he's doing in South China Sea or what he's doing vis-a-vis India. And the whole of government challenge that China faces, China poses to the United States, which U.S. leadership has talked about, will continue. And therefore, Indo-Pacific concept, Quad, relationship with India, military ties with India, all that.
So you're seeing continuity. You're seeing an element of bipartisan continuity. So therefore, it doesn't make a difference whether it's Biden or Trump in a way. So we move from,
one thing, Rajdeep, I want to say, which is that, Obama had launched the TPP and all that. And now we have our CEP in which United States is not there. Mm-hmm. So I am curious about the future of the RCEP. Should America want to revive the TPP in some way or the other, so that not to leave the economic space to China alone?
Raj Chengappa, 24 hours ago, we were still where we are in terms of the numbers, but Biden is increasingly within striking distance now. Is the fact that we've had such a polarized election campaign, and as Kishore has put it and some of our other guests, that America is going to now be more inward looking. You've got to deal with COVID, you've got an economy which still needs to be lifted up in the months and years ahead. Do you see, therefore, a sort of diminished America in a way, problematic for the world and for India in particular?
Well, I think Biden brings some good news. Let's put it that way. If Trump was insular and disruptive and deglobalizing, Biden is going to be, in many senses, getting back into the game. He himself said that America will be back at the head of the table, of the global table.
But a divided, fractured America,
well, that's domestic. That's domestic.
Isn't that where his focus is going to have to be?
Of course it will be, because at home he has serious health issues in terms of the pandemic. The economy has contracted like never before, probably lost 20 million jobs and all these things, equal to the Great Depression. And you've got racial divide. He has plans for each of these, and whether that works, we need to see. Even the economy, he is somewhat like he's got a plan, right? Which he says he's going to spend $700 billion on infrastructure and actually encourage what he calls Buy America. Okay, it sounds very much like America first, but it's Buy America, meaning by getting...
Would he cut H-1B visas? Would he sort of become... the challenges of our times are what? Jobs, getting jobs back for an American president, getting jobs back, getting America, the economy back on track, getting the COVID pandemic under control.
Sure.
That will mean a lot of investment in America itself.
Yeah, so he's setting aside $700 billion for that. He says you'll have to buy from American companies. So we need to see how he's going to tighten the restrictions in terms of our exports to that. And he's also saying that when it comes to racial divide, he's got a plan in terms of the justice system. When it comes to immigration, he's going to be softer, particularly in terms of looking down south and the wall and everything else. He's talked of dismantling that. And possibly with India, less sort of putting pressure on us on our various visas. So that's the good news. And if you take a look at the way he deals with things, I mean, I've talked to people who've dealt with him. He's decisive. He's process-driven. Unlike Trump, who's volatile, who's runs diplomacy on Twitter, who's
so you'll be back to a more institutionalized arrangement with America.
You will have people that you could deal with. He believes in the process. So what India would look at is there are, of course, on defense and China particularly, we need to have President Biden's or the President-elect Biden's interest on that matter, because for us, it is critical. Biden will want to rejoin the Paris climate change. He needs China. America's highly dependent on the Chinese economy. So there is no question of him disengaging or going to conflict with China. How much he makes up with China, how much pressure. He's talked, by the way, Rajdeep, of having a coalition of democracies to take on China. He says that the way to do it is not to be so confrontationist, but actually to build pressure through various alliances around that. And India is a very, very vital part of that. For us, really what we need to look at is, one, we are sure continuity is going to happen on defense. It needs to be strengthened. There will be more pressure for us to act on the ground. Two, trade. Trade is where we are going to be having, is he going to restore the GSP as quickly? Unlikely to. He is going to negotiate with us on trade and put more pressure on us to open our markets. The third issue, which I think is very, very important, is how much is he going to come down on the values issue, which is the human rights issue. How much of that is he going to raise in terms of religious intolerance? I think on Kashmir, he's going to be less subdued. And finally, finally, a point on Pakistan, which is always our sort of thing. I don't think they're going back to the old policy of engaging Pakistan. At the moment, Pakistan, after what is going to happen in Afghanistan, the stakes are minimal for America.
I want to come back to the values issue. Let's look at that, as we take this discussion forward, because, Sadanand Dume, there's a sense that Trump went against certain core American values, the values of inclusion, of building a society that welcomed immigrant communities, for example. Do you see, assuming we have a Biden presidency, do you see America restoring that sense of civility, decency of an inclusive society? Will that happen overnight, given that we've had such a polarized election?
Yeah, I think for sure. You're going to see the rhetoric in terms of immigration will be dramatically different. It'll be much more inclusive. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we're going to return to an entirely pre-2016 view of either trade or immigration. So, for instance, if you look at Biden's trade plans, they're pretty protectionist. But if you look at his history, he's traditionally been a moderate Democrat who believed in free trade. On the values question, again, I think one way to look at this is that Trump was really an aberration. If you look at the U.S. in general, democracy and human rights has always been part of the mix. You would recall, Rajdeep, when Obama came to India in 2015, he gave this very artfully worded speech at Siri Fort where he essentially encouraged India to live up to its own highest ideals.
That's right. He spoke about religious intolerance.
In terms of pluralism and diversity and so on. And what we've seen with the Trump administration is this very dramatic departure from the past. You have had administrations in the past that have taken a more realist view and that have placed, for example, the China question or commercial questions more front and center. But you have not seen an administration before Trump that simply was not interested, that didn't care. So you're going to see a return to normalcy in that sense. I don't think that the Biden administration will place human rights or democracy at the center of its engagement with India. China remains by far the most important element. But I do think that you're going to see more engagement and potentially more friction, particularly with Congress. on those sets of issues, things like Kashmir, things like CAA, and so on.
Let me come back to you, Ms. Bauman. Do you see America, therefore, restoring, I come back to it, that sense of value systems, which many believe have been lost? The liberals certainly believe have been lost under a Trump administration. Is it going to be that easy to heal a fractured country?
Well, I think our country is becoming much more diverse demographically. We're seeing enormous changes over time in the younger age groups who are much more tolerant, much more inclusive. And so I expect us going forward to look into a brighter future than what Trump has offered on that score overall. I agree that he was an aberration. Americans, speaking to the point about internationalism, have always been reluctant about international involvement. And I think they recognize that we're a global power, but at the same time are a little tired of bearing what they've seen as a lot of burdens alone. And they're a little tired of the costs. And we were pulled in that direction during the Trump administration. And now during the Biden campaign, we'll be pulled back more to the center, I think, overall. So I'm still quite positive about the future. And I do believe Biden will reach across the aisle and can be successful because he has so many Republican friends in Congress.
You think it's an aberration, Professor Mattu, that Trump, assuming, again, we're all assuming that Trump isn't going to make it. I mean, we still don't know, but assuming that Donald Trump doesn't make it and Joe Biden becomes president, will we see the Trump 4 years as an aberration? Or is this a reflection of an America which is deeply divided and polarized?
Two things, Rajdeep. You can't at once say that Trump is an aberration and Trumpism will outlive Trump. There's clearly a large section of public opinion and voters in the United States who believe in what Trump stood for. So you can't just wish that away because President Biden will occupy the White House. However, I think President Biden, and let me say this because as an academic, I live in a free world, is not the most inspiring democratic choice, but he is what we have. And he has a chance to rebuild America in the image of FDR. FDR, Roosevelt, after the Depression, built an America through a New Deal, which was socially inclusive, economically inclusive, and inclusive in culturally and led to the civil rights being accorded to all the minorities in the 60s and 70s. So here you have a situation where FDR is inheriting, where Biden is inheriting a crumbled system. And let me say this, while you keep talking about the future, we may still have Trump acting like a Samson, destroying the temples of the Philistines because he feels betrayed. So I wouldn't underestimate Trump's abilities to still be extremely destructive in the next 3-4 months, even if I
know you said that last night, that you fear that Trump will use the next 2 months to create some element of more further disruption in some form in the world.
And the analogy of Samson and the temples of the Philistines is appropriate.
So we're going to look for a Delilah. We've got to look for a Delilah then to control...
Delilah is the people of America who have betrayed him, and now he's going to destroy those Philistines. That's what Samson did in his last effort when he regained his strength. So Trump, don't underestimate Trump even now. And more importantly, Biden has a chance to go down in history as FDR Mark II.
I want to take this to you, Kishore Mehbubani. Your thoughts, under whose presidency will the world sleep better tonight? We still don't know who's going to be president, but more and more likely it's going to be Joe Biden. But under whose presidency would the world sleep better, Biden or Trump?
Oh, I think there's no question whatsoever that I think everybody in the world, most countries in the world are happier to see a Biden presidency, because at the end of the day, you must remember, let's say if you're a leader of a country like Indonesia or Bangladesh or Vietnam even, you really got to focus on your economic development. That's very, very critical. And right now, with COVID-19 being your number one challenge, restarting economic growth is very, very important. And how do you restart economic growth? You got to have stability and predictability. And at the end of the day, as you know, Donald Trump insulted Joe Biden by calling him Sleepy Joe. But actually, a Sleepy Joe presidency is exactly what the world needs. We need less excitement and more stability and predictability. And, the former Indonesian ambassador to United States, Dino Jalal is his name, a wonderful diplomat, wrote an article just a couple of weeks ago, said, I hope people in the Washington, D.C. are noticing that nobody in Southeast Asia is excited about Trump's attacks on China and going after China, because at the end of the day, the Southeast Asian states also have to trade with China. They need some stability and some predictability. They would like to see a strong U.S. presence to counterbalance China, but they want a strong U.S. presence that behaves in a predictable, rational fashion, and not in the kind of erratic, unpredictable way in which Donald Trump has been handling his presidency. And that's why I believe that a Biden presidency will be very widely welcomed.
I just have a minute on the program. A quick reaction. Who will the world sleep better under, Kawal Sibal? A Biden presidency or a Trump presidency? Quick answer.
On the whole, while Trump has been relatively good to India, but so was Biden good to India as vice president.
Who will you sleep better under? If you knew tonight that it was Donald Trump, would you sleep better, or would you sleep better under a Biden presidency?
I think the world will sleep better if Biden won, certainly.
Okay, the world will sleep better if Biden won. Raj Chengappa, very quickly, who will the world sleep better under, Biden or Trump?
Without doubt, Biden.
Without doubt, Biden. Sadanand Dume, who will the world sleep better under, a Biden or a Trump presidency?
I think we can all agree that Sleepy Joe is better for everybody's sleep.
Sleepy Joe better for everyone's sleep. Amitabh Mattu, who will the world sleep better under, since this was something you said the other day?
Undoubtedly, Biden. I echo the sentiments of the other panelists. I think we have a near consensus in the world now.
Okay, so maybe in the next hour or so, once we get that big result coming in from Georgia, we can all go back to sleep in a better world. Possibly. We could probably be saying, Ao Joe Biden and goodbye Donald. Maybe that could well happen tonight. Thank you all very much for joining me here on our discussion. Let's take a break.